here we are. We're still talking to Ummagawd, aka Tommy Tabahia. And on this one, we're talking about the advancements that have happened in FPV and what it felt like then versus now. And interestingly, Tommy gives his take on what he thinks the most important technological advancement is in FPV. And I did not expect it. It was not the one that I thought it was going to be. And but I agree with him. I think it's pretty important. If you like what I do here, give it a like, subscribe. And if you really like it and you want the unedited, complete version of this interview as well as the podcast, then you can go check it out on my Patreon channel. I really do appreciate you all for coming along. And we're going to hear from Tommy right after a note from this sponsor. Y'all have a great day. Bye. You're staring at one of the tallest buildings in the world. Are you afraid? Ground control frames. Freestyle like you mean it. Like if you had to pick a feel for the FPV community when you started versus the FPV community now.
We're talking about the flying tech, or what are we referring
to? Kind of all of it, right?
All of it. Yeah. Okay. Well, if I were to try and articulate what flying, like the flying technology is now, it is truly you, meaning the technology is there for you to express yourself, in a flying kind of way, however you like. And for the most part, it's a true representation of you. Whereas back then, it was not. It was more of a representation of how well can you just keep it under control, because it's wobbly, it's drifting all over the place. You think prop wash is bad now. It looked like the world was ending whenever you took a hard turn. Like it was, and back then it was a lot about the design, how well you could put it together in your PID tune, because how well you could do that allowed your flying to look better. Mm-hmm. So I guess if you were to think about it in terms of that and how that kind of relates to the community, it was all about the build and the innovation, not so much the flying. It was like the flying was almost secondary. It's just like, hey, check out this new cool thing that I built because it hovers like it's on rails, check out this new thing because it's not on a 1306. It's actually on an 1806 motor now. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, just these little things. And then I just remember HQ is making mini quad props. Like, check this out. And to you and I, now we hear these things and it's like big deal. There's 5 million options that you can choose from but back then, these little things all made the difference. It was, this one flew longer, but then this one would break very easily. And it was just so many things that really impacted the flying experience. And the flying experience back then was just, can I keep it together? It was very much that I built this thing and it's flying. Now, can I just keep it in the air without it falling apart? And, now it's I built this thing and I can do these cool things with it. And here's what that end result looks like. Yeah. And I don't even want to say that it was never about that back then, because like even, before mini quads, like the big 9 and 10 inch stuff, people were putting GoPros and gimbals on them. Like it was very much the DJI Phantom before the Phantom came about. In fact, just a little fun story. That's where DJI kind of started. It was in the hobby world, and they were making, the flame wheel, and the whole point of it was to carry a camera. Not to fly crazy, but it was to just carry a camera. And so like I remember like getting a TBS Discovery Pro, and it was, again, it wasn't about the flying, it was just about having, capturing cool things from an aerial perspective, because that for sure back then was just something you'd never seen before. And then like just slowly but surely, it was like, well, maybe we can make it go fast. Maybe we can make it do this, maybe, and then it's all downhill from there, so to speak.
Yeah, I like how you state it, because it almost feels like back in the day, you were like, what you could do was very highly dictated by the state of technology back then.
Oh, 100%.
And I think the interesting thing about that is like, I feel like nowadays, like somebody comes up, I got a new trick, and it's like, big deal, man. Like 5 or 10 people have probably already done it. You just named it, right? But I can understand now when the actual constraint on the tricks wasn't, say, physics, it was the actual physical structure of the quad. How it would be a super huge deal if you like, and interestingly enough, like it puts like things like the Rubik's Cube, right? That was well done by the time I got into it. And I've always looked at the Rubik's Cube from the perspective of somebody who has pretty much always flown for the footage, thinking it's not visually appealing. Right. But I bet that blew everybody's mind back in the day.
Yeah. Well, if I were to try to pinpoint one specific innovation that really allowed tricks or acrobatics to become a thing, it would have to be air mode. It would have to be air mode, because it was, I remember very specifically, and it was with the Blackout Mini H quad, like the first time that I did like this, like an inverted thing. And I remember like, oh my gosh, if I don't bring my stick to, full zero, because, the second you do that, the gyros turn off and it just falls. And good luck trying to recover it. But I remember the first time I did that, and I was just like, oh man, like I could try and get hang time if I could just really master bringing this throttle stick down just low enough that it's not
zero.
Yeah, that it's not giving me, it's not giving me thrust in the opposite direction, thus maximizing my hang time. And I remember vividly having a discussion with Noah, because I was like, hey, check this out, And then like we were talking about how that works, and then we were trying to think about like, well, what can we do so that you're not just, learning based off of muscle memory, right? Because we're talking like a millimeter, the difference of a millimeter between still staying stable and then it just falling out the sky because the gyros.
Well, the props would stop.
Right.
The props, you'd be upside down, and the props would just stop spinning.
Yeah, I forgot about that, because the default, if I'm not mistaken, the default setting in Betaflight, or not even, it was Baseflight back then, was that the props would stop. So the whole where it stays spinning didn't come till later. Yeah. But I remember talking with Chad, and I was like showing him like what I was doing, and he started doing it, and he's like, oh my God, like we could do some really cool stuff with this. And that is, I want to say that's when the whole idle up feature, not feature, but just the idle up trick, just the workaround, the hack came about, which was to basically, once you arm, flip that switch, and now zero throttle won't let you go below that. And then that's when like all kinds of just S-flip, you could always do S-flips, but it just looked way better when you're not speeding down as soon as you're upside down, And then that eventually turned into air mode because we were talking to Boris and we're like, hey, Boris, how do we do this? And then, sure enough, he came back like a week later and was just like, oh, here, try load this. I don't know what to call it yet, but
well, and that's what actually forced the fork from Cleanflight to Betaflight, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, so there was. Oh, I don't know.
I think so. Boris talked about it, and I recall there was a big change that he made to the code that he wanted Dominic to pull into to approve the pull request, and Dominic, he was moving, and there was just a lot of stuff going on. And what Boris said was that he never intended to fork Cleanflight. And he ended up having to, because Dominic basically, he was the only one that could approve a pull request, and he just didn't have time for so long that by that time the code bases had diverged so significantly that that forking was the only option.
Could you imagine? Like that's one of those like points in time where if that didn't work out that way, like what
And I think it was I think it was air mode. I'll ask him.
That would be very interesting. It would be interesting to know if it was air mode, because I think air mode is kind of the birth of allowing what you can do these days.
No, that's a really wild perspective, actually. Like, I hadn't ever put that two together, because I was, that was going to be the very next question, which is, what's the one technological change that you think was the best? And I did not expect it to be air mode.
Yeah, I would absolutely say air mode. There is nothing like I would argue that nobody flies today, with the exception of maybe long range people and maybe Cinewook people, where you wouldn't use air mode, whether you're thinking about it or not, right? Because basically, if your flying involves cutting your throttle all the way down to zero, so that you can maximize hang time, so that you can go into a controlled dive, that's all because of air mode. Like that, you wouldn't be able to do any of that without air mode or an idle up. Because I know some people.
I was gonna say, I was like, I know one person that doesn't play air
some
mode.
Some people keep it old school and people idle up. His name rhymes with real. Yeah.
Real steady? No, wait, sorry. Real Steve. Who knows?
Real Steve.
Real Steve. It's Real Steve. That's right. It's Real Steve.
Real Steve. Yeah, Real Steve.
So if you had to, besides air mode, do you think what are some of the other tipping points in the industry? Like a moment or a thing that came along? Because it sounds like air mode was a much bigger thing than I realized.
I think so. So I guess maybe the other thing would just be FPV technology. So, I remember back when like the immersion channels was like the main thing, right? Like there was the boss cam, but like that was kind of also just kind of weird, because it was just really weird channel. Immersion was the first one that like, hey, it's like almost evenly spread out. Whereas boss cam A was just like 3 channels way over here and then like one in the middle and then like another, it was just really, really weird. Anyways, and so I think maybe that probably would be the next thing, is that FPV video transmission technology that allowed really more than 2 or 3 people. Because I remember a time when 2 or 3 was kind of the max. And so that, in my opinion, when you go up to this flying field, it wasn't that you were waiting in line anymore. Now it's just like you can get a bunch of people, which then, translated directly into the racing when that became a big thing, because obviously the more people that could race in the heat, the more exciting that entire event was. So yeah, I'd say that if you're holding a gun to my head and pick something else besides air mode.
Yeah. So I actually expected that to be the answer.
Okay.
Because, the idea that you can see better means you can fly better.
Well, you can see better and just have more people in the air, because like I've always and it's a very, I guess it's a double-edged sword, because this hobby could be like a very just independent, your own thing, but it could also very much be, a social thing with your friends. And it's just hands down, it's so much fun when you can fly with your friends.
Yeah.
You know?
That is for certain. I had not flown with almost anyone until I started flying with my sons. And now the idea of just going out to a field by myself and pulling out 6-8 packs, it's like, it'd be boring.
Yeah, no,
So,
I feel you. I feel you.
So last question on kind of tech, right? So there have been air mode video changes that have been pretty pivotal in the industry. What do you think is the most valuable? Right. So, and then we're talking monetary value. Like, if you could go back and own one technological change and it was yours and you could license it or something, what would it be?
Tech. Okay, let me just make sure I'm understanding you. You want me to call out something that is valuable? Well, why? I'm curious. Why add the monetary aspect to it?
Well, probably because I'm greedy. No, I'm kidding. It goes back to the way that I think about things. It is oftentimes, you get people that are passionate, right? And passion will carry you only so far, right? Would you be making the content that you make now if you couldn't also get paid on the same skills? And so the monetary aspect for me, like, a lot of people get upset. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe you want to charge money for that. And my take on it is, no, please charge money, because that means you will now be doubly invested into it. And the days that the passion is not enough, maybe the money will be, right?
Okay, I understand. So what is it that you invest in that really gets you actually invested into it?
Yeah.
Man, I feel like everybody values money differently.
Sure.
So I'm probably going to throw you a left curveball here and say time. Because
ooh, wow, that's deep.
Well, look, I can't tell you how many hours of my life that I will never get back was invested into either just researching into something, finding out what part plays well with what, because that was important back then. Because like I said, you couldn't just buy this transmitter with this flight controller and this ESC and expect it to go well. You couldn't. So whether it was that or whether it was because the information wasn't out there, you just went out and bought it and just crossed your fingers and hoped it was okay. To building frames now these days is so much faster than how it was back then. Because remember, back then, after you solder everything up, you still had to flash those ESCs. And if you forgot, you probably shrink wrapped them already. And you're like, damn it, I got to undo this nice shrink wrap that I did because I forgot. I gotta go, So, and then, assuming like you didn't let the magic smoke out and it would actually hover, then you got to go take it out and go PID tune it so that it would just kind of hover, So on top of just waiting sometimes weeks on end for a part to just come into freaking stock, and if you were smart, you would buy twice as many as that you need because you don't know when it's going to come back in stock, and you don't know of the however you got how many of them would actually work, right? So I would say time, because that goes into everything. The time to learning how to fly. There was no sims back then. You just had to figure it out. You want to try a different move that nobody's done before? Try it. You might fall off the sky. Yeah, you might break something. Or I remember one time getting new firmware to try, and it was on a fresh build, and I was so excited. Like, I plugged it in, and there was a bug where if you didn't do an arming sequence like the right way, the second you give it throttle, it would just shoot to the moon. And I had worked so hard on that build because this was like my clean, the one that I wanted to take pictures of and show it off and be like, like everything's, tucked
Right.
wire, like the wires are all to the right length, like everything's in a spot that makes no sense for building. You just did it because you wanted the bragging rights of having a clean, and it was gone in 10 seconds. And you don't get that time back. So that's what I'm going to go with. I'm going to go with time. That's like, you put enough time into something, you're invested in it, and you can always make money, but you can't bring time back.
No one will answer that question better, period. I may just not even ask it at this point, because there is no follow-up to that, which is, and honestly, you're right. Like it is time. Time is probably one of the most valuable things we own, or we don't own it. That's the problem. We don't own it.
Absolutely. 100%.
All right. Well, now that I sit here humbled, hearing about the gear is pretty awesome. Hearing about the tech is also really awesome. But this hobby is nothing without the people. And there's one thing that consistently seems to come up in this conversation, and really a lot of the other conversations I've had with pilots, and that's sharing. Because we all love what we do so much that we want to share. So in the next episode, you get to hear Tommy's take on sharing, including the thing he wishes he could take back. If you like what I do here, I hope that I hope that you'll subscribe. And if you really like what I do here and you want the unedited podcast and the unedited interview in whole, then go head over to my Patreon. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.